We're continuing our study in Song of Solomon, chapter 4. The last study we ended at around verse 5 and 6. This is a description from Solomon of his love. By his love, I mean the description of the woman that he loves. We see from chapter 4, I think the last thing we talked about was Joe pointed out that there are 7 main attributes that he brings out, Solomon does. And of course 7 has always kind of had a number of completion type of concept in the Bible. There's certain numbers that God has kind of associated a certain concept to, and 7 certainly is one of those. But as we noticed with verse 2, talking about how she appears to him. It's not just physical characteristics, it's how he feels when he sees her. This is what is bringing to his mind. This is the type of emotion and the mindset that he has when he looks at her. So it's not just the fact that she may have all her teeth, verse 2, but also the fact that when he sees her, there's this sense of like when he talks about the dove's eyes. Obviously she doesn't have literal dove's eyes, but it's the idea of this peace and this communication that is there when he looks into her eyes. Verse 3, your lips are like a strand of scarlet, your mouth is lovely, your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. I had somebody bring me a pomegranate to the house. I appreciate Miss Ruby and Savannah doing that. Bring me a pomegranate to have. I actually picked up some pomegranate seeds at Market Street. Can't say I'm a fan. But regardless, the idea is that this was something that was desirable. It was something that was sweet. It was something that was fulfilling, nourishing. And that's the concept here. Your temples behind your veil, your cheeks, your face is like a piece of pomegranate in that it's healthy, it's beautiful to him. Now, your neck is like a Tower of David, built for an armory, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Talked about the neck and the regal nature, of her, maybe her stature, in addition to the fact that there's this, I guess you could say, it sounds like he's describing a necklace. In fact, a necklace is going to come up later on in chapter 4 and chapter 5. But he describes her neck as something that is powerful. In addition to this, later he's going to describe her as someone that cannot be conquered. This is especially from the perspective of the sexual relationship. This is something she must give, not something that he must conquer. And so the idea of this military almost look at it kind of gives this sense in which she is, she has this powerful defense, so to speak. And of course, we look back in chapter 2, or chapter 3 rather, how that she kind of sees herself, because she's a virgin, as being defended by the law. That both prevents her from being with her love, but also allows her safety. And so in verse 5, your 2 breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. I want to take us back to chapter 2. Because remember, we talked here in chapter 4, and there in verse 6, when it says, until the day breaks, the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. Last time we talked about these from the perspective that the peace and the comfort, the desire to be alone with her. All right, but I got to thinking about this a little bit more in context of chapter 2 and in verse 17. This is as Solomon is speaking, so this is as the woman is speaking to Solomon, or about Solomon. My beloved is mine, verse 16, I am his. He feeds his flock among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag upon the mountains of Bether. More I thought about this, and I connected chapter 2, verse 17 to chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, the more I thought about the fact of her welcoming him to her. In fact, there's several commentaries suggest that this is actually the embrace of the sexual relationship. Okay, so when she describes him as a gazelle upon the mountains of Bether, and then in chapter 4, where he describes her, and he describes twins of a gazelle, talking about her breasts, and in verse 6, until the day breaks, the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. And of course, that myrrh and that frankincense, there's the concept of the value of myrrh and frankincense that we know existed, but also the sense of satisfaction, okay, of pleasure being associated with that. And so I'm changing the way I thought about it from a couple of weeks ago to now, in that it might very well be, when he describes the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense, that is that description, maybe not just of her breasts, but the idea of coming to her, to take her as his wife, to enjoy that sexual relationship together. So anything through verse 6 so far? Verse 7. You are all fair, my love, and there is no spot in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse. With me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the lions' dens, from the mountains of leopards. It's interesting when you start looking into the Hebrew of the Song of Solomon. There are some very specific words that are used in the Song of Solomon that aren't found very often anywhere else in the Old Testament. And when I say specific, they're used. Remember, we talked before about the personal pronouns that are described as having a feminine or a masculine, describing basically who is being addressed with each sentence of dialogue. So notice how that he is speaking. And then verse 7, you are all fair, my love. There is no spot in you. There is nothing about you that I don't like. Okay, he's not talking about literal spots or anything. There's nothing about you that I don't like. Everything about you I love. When he says, come with me, that with me part actually isn't in the Hebrew. I know it's not italicized here, but it's not there. And that's interesting because rather than strictly having this, let's go on a walk, it's more of a call. Okay, that's what's being described in verse 8. Come from Lebanon, my spouse. And then that with me isn't there. From Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top. He's asking her to look towards him and then to come to him. And so that idea carries with it, especially given the context of verse 8, these are unapproachable places for him. Okay, remember we talked earlier in chapter 4 about her neck being this tower, this idea that he can't approach her. She must give herself to him. And this idea from the top of Senir and Hermon, which are mountains, from the lions' dens, I can't approach those. The mountains of the leopards, it's almost as if he's exalting her in this language. She's at the top, and he can't approach her lest she come to him. And I think that's a very interesting perspective given the fact that Solomon was a king. Okay, Solomon and his authority, yet within the relationship, the marriage relationship and the sexual relationship, that authority that's not something he can take from her. That's something she must give to him. Okay, thoughts through verse 8 so far. Verse 9. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. You have ravished my heart with one look of your eyes, with one link of your necklace. All right, so the first thing that a lot of people, in fact, I've read commentaries in the past that really try to make a big deal out of my sister, my spouse. They don't understand what that means. The term in the Hebrew sister, it's a term of endearment. Okay, it doesn't necessarily recognize or reference some kind of a familial family type of connection or relationship by blood or anything like that. It's a term of endearment. It's a term of closeness. It's a recognition of a relationship that is not just romantic, but also a friendship as well. Okay, so in verse 9 when he says, you have ravished my heart, this is kind of interesting because this phrase here, and I'm going to mention Garrett's commentary here in verse 9, because I didn't realize this. It's interesting. The Hebrew here is ambiguous, and perhaps deliberately so. The sense of the verb could be either you have taken away my heart, in the sense of I am hopelessly in love with you, or you have heartened me, in the sense that you have sexually aroused me. The cases for both meanings are strong, and it may be that both nuances were recognized by the ancient audience. If so, rather than decide between the two, one should read this as a double entendre. That is that the text implies both meanings are intended. So when he says, you have ravished my heart, there's a sense in which I'm taken with you, I'm hopelessly in love with you, I'm intoxicated. In fact, the idea of being intoxicated by her, something that's going to come up later, there's that, but also the fact that I desire you. Okay, both of those meanings exist here. And when he says that term, my spouse, this is a term that comes up throughout Song of Solomon, but it's a specific term not just for wife, it's bride. Okay, my bride. And there's this emphasis of not just relationship as Solomon as the husband and her as the wife, but also the emphasis of the fact that this sexual relationship can now exist. It is now lawful. It is now allowed and blessed because of the fact that she is his bride. You have ravished my heart with one look of your eyes, with one link of your necklace. So just from a glance, okay, just a glance from her just kind of makes his heart leap, so to speak. Kind of makes him kind of lose his breath type of thing. And that's the intoxicating nature of it. Okay, this is just this kind of losing himself by looking at her. All right? Anything so far through verse 9? Verse 10, how fair is your love, my sister, my spouse. How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes than all spices. Your lips, O my spouse, drip as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. The emphasis here is that intoxicating nature, this intoxicating feeling that he has come over him anytime he's around her. So that's when he says, how much better than wine is your love. And whether he's speaking relationship-wise, okay, just being with her, being around her, enjoying her company, or the actual sexual relationship, which that's how Garrett takes this, the idea of the actual sexual relationship being something that he craves. That could be, but I tend to look at this as he would crave that because of her, because he's hopelessly in love with her, because he's so smitten by her. So as a result, he's intoxicated by her. All right? And he describes the scent of your perfumes than all spices. Again, this idea of this intoxicating, pleasurable nature of being with her. Your lips, and of course this would certainly describe the idea of kissing. Oh, my spouse, drip as the honeycomb. It's like honey and milk are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. The idea of being with her, kissing her, and spending time with her, and certainly that would include the sexual relationship, is described as something that gives him great fulfillment, great satisfaction, verse 11. Thoughts and comments through verse 11? Yes, sir.
Get a little insight of his upbringing, of where he's lived his life. He refers to Lebanon.
Yep.
Like we would refer to things of what we grew up doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think of Dwayne and the livestock and his appreciation for the perfection or near perfection that he sees in things, where he sees animals and things he sees God's perfect creation, so we see his description of her is his life.
Yeah.
Of what he grew up seeing, things that are beautiful.
And the luxurious, wealthy type of background.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fragrances that he refers to are very characteristic of that neighborhood or that Lebanon. And
Yeah.
he keeps referring to Lebanon, and here we are, we don't have a clue what
Right.
he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, typically Lebanon.
We
Go
can
ahead.
understand his description
Yeah.
of what his upbringing, his knowledge, his background.
Right.
And we could do the same thing, but what we see is in the beauty of, you know, of our spouses and the things they do that,
Mhm.
you know, delight us.
Right.
And so we can understand, you know, where he's coming from, even though he doesn't use the same words we would use.
Right. Right. You know, it speaks to his exposure to these luxurious things like frankincense and myrrh and the perfumes and so forth. There's also a sense in which because these perfumes were all natural, okay, these were all natural types of things. In fact, throughout all of the Song of Solomon, there's this description like milk and honey. They're natural things that were highly prized and highly valued. And again, we've talked before already about how often this idea, this pastoral look to it with the shepherd and the sheep, the gazelles and so forth, the doe, the doves, all these different references, it's a very, very natural look at the association of that this is a natural relationship that God has created for the husband and for the wife. Okay, and you talked about Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon are mentioned here in the Song of Solomon. Lebanon was known for its towering trees, its great prize, highly valuable and highly usable trees, and the wood to build things with. These were basically like what we might refer to as mahogany, or I don't know what other types of valuable wood exists now, but mahogany would be like a highly valued wood today. That's the way the cedars of Lebanon were at that time. Your average Joe probably didn't maybe have all that much experience with the cedars of Lebanon or with frankincense and myrrh. They may have known of them, but they may not have had the means to be able to actually have them around when they were growing up or anything else like that, to be able to utilize them in poetry the way Solomon does. Nolan?
I think to Doug's point, when we remember this is a song to however widespread audience the song went, it would be references that would make sense
Sure.
to them.
Sure.
I believe Doug's hitting on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something that you can relate to. Yes, ma'am.
I looked up the cedars of Lebanon one time, and they only grow there. It's kind of like an aspen that needs to have high elevation and a certain amount of, can't get too hot or whatever. And I was looking up to see if cedars of Lebanon would grow here, but they are characteristic of a certain environment, and so it would probably be a very pretty place when you consider that part of the country where there aren't always a lot of trees. It's
Yeah.
kind of like West Texas.
Kind of sticks out, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about, I saw a thing one time about green pastures, and they're not what we think of a green pastures being a wheat field. It was pretty desert looking, and then there were patches of green.
Oh.
And so I think the cedars of Lebanon are kind of like that. A tree of any significance wouldn't have been commonplace.
Right.
So
Very cool. Joe?
Just too quick on that, on the Lebanon wood, back in chapter 3, the end of that, his bed is made out of wood from there.
Yeah.
But then also, I believe, wasn't the temple constructed in part from that type of wood, so the Jews themselves
Would associate that with some of that's highly prized.
with that, at least to that extent.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Anything else through verse 11? Okay, verse 12. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, fragrant henna with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloes, with all the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. So as he describes her as a garden enclosed and a spring that is shut up. Okay, and of course this is speaking back to the fact, of course, here in chapter 5, as we're going to see, it's going to be kind of a mirror to chapter 3. In chapter 3, she's describing her wedding night and that the approachment of that sexual relationship, both with excitement and anxiety. Okay, this fear of losing that status as being a daughter of Jerusalem, being a virgin. She's afraid of losing that, and yet at the same time she's excited. That same thing's going to come up in chapter 5, but it's actually going to incorporate the consummation of that relationship. So when he describes her here in verses 12 and 13 and 14, he describes the fact that, notice all these different pleasant natural things he brings up. Brings up pomegranates again, pleasant fruits, henna, spikenard, saffron, calamus, cinnamon. There's the value, certainly. I mean, these would have been all highly prized, highly valuable type of commodities in Solomon's time. There's the state in which, because of the way they were used as fragrances, both natural fragrances just to kind of make things smell good, but also in terms of luxury. Okay, the way in which they were used with foods and so forth, there's a sense in which complete contentment is being described. In fact, I wanted to mention this here in verse 12 from Garrett, because he brings up some interesting points on this. He says, "The man now describes his beloved under two metaphors, the locked garden and the sealed fountain. This shows fairly plainly that this is an appeal for her to open her pleasures to him. The catalog of exotic spices in this garden serves to suggest that the pleasures of the woman's love are abundant, and especially that they are varied. He could never grow bored in such a garden. They do not, however, have specified symbolic reference, that is, as parts of the woman's anatomy. The spring of water is a metaphor for sexual love in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 15 through 20. So I find that interesting because there are other commentaries that attempt to draw some sort of anatomical reference or analogies to what's being described here. That's not, and I agree with Garrett, that's not what's being described. But it is the sense in which he is completely content with her. He could never grow bored with her. And it has to do with his love for her and his enjoyment of being with her. Okay, we see myrrh and aloe, frankincense, verse 14, the chief spices, fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. It's like this constant flow of contentment and love and satisfaction that he gains from being with her. Anything through verse 15. Verse 16. So here's the woman, she's speaking now at this point, and again, based on the ebb and flow of the context as well as the pronouns being used, this is kind of how we determine. Remember, the Shulamite, that part's not written in the Hebrew. That's put in by man to help us remember where we are here. So verse 16, "Awake, O north wind, come, O south, blow upon my garden, that its spices may flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits." Again, rather than being something specific or anatomical, this has more to do with the symbolism of the fact that she is welcoming him. Okay, this has nothing to do with him conquering her. She is opening to him. She is allowing this garden to open up so that he can come and enjoy the pleasures of the garden. Anything through verse 16? Yes, sir.
Just think of that term that was several times about conquering. Maybe we automatically jump to physical force or strength to overcome, to overpower. But the same writer, and I didn't have the chapter verse, but in Proverbs he talks about the city that's surrounded by the mighty army and the lowly man they find who comes up with a plan to conquer, to defeat this huge army. It wasn't by overpowering force. There are different ways
Sure.
to conquer.
Sure. Yeah. And to and in many ways, I guess you could say what's being described here is almost like a peaceful nature of what's being described. There is no violence on Solomon's end. There is no threatening or sense of being threatened from her. Okay, now what she's going to describe later in chapter 5, certainly there's this fear that she has. She feels very alone. She feels to a certain extent abandoned, not because of Solomon, but because of the situation. But what's being described is a very peaceful concept, not something that is being forced from her. Anything else through verse 16 and chapter 4? All right, chapter 5. So she's going to continue, really in some ways, as we see at the end of chapter 4 and in verse 16, she speaks. He's going to start in chapter 5 once again, but then she's going to pick up in the middle of chapter 5, and there's going to be a dialogue here that is one of the longest from her in the entire Song of Solomon. Now keep in mind that the Song of Solomon is a song. It is not a play. It is not some form of theater. It is not a dramatic reference. It is not a history, an actual history of something. This is a song, okay? And that's important to keep in mind. So he says, I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. All the ways he described her back in chapter 4. Chapter 5 is kind of this is the pinnacle of the song. Everything else has been kind of leading up to this point. We noticed earlier in chapter 3 about this, what seems to be this wedding procession, this wedding ceremony, this constant referral to her as his bride, and this constant beckoning to one another, to come to each other. Well, now here in chapter 4 and chapter 5, the way he describes her is as if it's the eve, the wedding night. Okay, and as they're coming to consummate this relationship, this is where chapter 5 comes in. So he is enjoying the pleasures of his bride here. When he says at the end of verse 1, to his friends, eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. And then verse 2, she speaks. So what's interesting here is he refers to this event, verse 1, but then to his friends he says, eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. What does that mean? All of a sudden he's speaking to the chorus, okay, or to his friends. Remember we talked before about the chorus that many times is specifically the daughters of Jerusalem, okay, the virgins, the daughters of Jerusalem would be the virgins, and perhaps specifically the wives and concubines of Solomon that had not yet had this opportunity with Solomon. But now there's also a sense in which there might be a male chorus, perhaps. But when Solomon says this, eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones, what is he doing? What is he saying? Is he encouraging promiscuity? Why does he say this?
Is it just to carry on with life?
Okay.
And drink and care, and, a lot of times, a wedding or something,
Mhm.
you put everything on hold until it's going on, and, and I don't know how much time is going on, possibly.
Yep.
Maybe that's what he's saying here.
Well,
Keep on, friends, don't just stand around and watch.
Yeah.
Just keep on,
Well,
things got to keep going.
I tend to think that this is connected to, he says, I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey, I've drunk my wine with my milk. He refers to her and the contentment he gains from her as honeycomb and milk. And it's as if this is a reference to that sexual relationship. So why would he say, eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones? Why? Well, why would he say that? I liken this to what the daughters of Jerusalem said, and for that matter, what the Shulamite girl says as well. Do not awaken love until it pleases. Okay, and that especially in chapter 3, and possibly even going back to chapter 1, that phrase is utilized to represent the idea of this sexual relationship has its place, but only in the right relationship, only in marriage. Okay, do not awaken love until it pleases, until it's the appropriate time. Well, here, that was always regarding the Shulamite girl and her daughter and the daughters of Jerusalem. Here, I take it to mean this representation of Solomon. It's as if Solomon's speaking to us to enjoy this relationship within its setting. Just as Solomon enjoyed this relationship within its setting, this sexual relationship that he enjoyed with the Shulamite girl on their wedding night, it's almost as if he's calling out, "Eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones." Enjoy that relationship together within its proper context, of course, within its proper relationship. But they are in their proper relationship. And there is nothing wrong, there is nothing sinful with enjoying that relationship between a husband and a wife. There's nothing taboo about it. There's nothing embarrassing about it. It is to be enjoyed. And that's what Solomon, I think that's what his point is as he says, and again, to his friends, that's not in the Hebrew. That's put in by man, and I would prefer that to not even be there. Okay, because it's almost like he's bragging to his friends. That's how we would interpret it in our modern way of thinking. But that's not at all. I think Solomon's addressing anyone who is reading the song, reading this duet, if you will, that this is the proper blessed relationship within marriage. First, Nolan, go ahead.
To me, within just the flow of the verse, the first part, I've done my. Now you go find the similar, you go find
Someone whom you can love. Yeah.
Right. You do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, within that relationship, go find someone you can have that marriage relationship with and enjoy the same blessings from it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I saw your hand, Lisa.
I use the English Standard, as most of you know. When I look back in verse 1, and the way this is written, it'll say he, others, she. So when I look back in chapter 1, verse 13, it says others, and we will make for you ornaments of gold studded with silver. So it sounds like the chorus is telling them what they're going to do, right? So when I flip over here to chapter 5, the part right there that says to his friend, my Bible just says others. So just to kind of turn the coin over, how do we know this isn't his friend saying, "Eat, O friends," talking to him and the bride. Drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. It's like a toast to them. If this is a song and you've got the male part, the female part, and the chorus, if it's a Broadway play or something, then that's the chorus saying, "You two be deeply in love." You know, so that says to his friends, but my Bible just says the word others.
Yeah.
No man put that in there.
Yeah.
And I know this is a difficult book, but that is another
That's a possibility.
possibility that his friends are saying, "We are so happy for you."
Yeah, it could be.
Because you are in this relationship and it's a right relationship.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, the idea that if it's Solomon speaking, then it's an encouragement, just like don't let do not awaken love until it pleases. And then if it's actually others speaking, then it's a kind of a blessing to Solomon and the Shulamite girl in the context. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to see if, because I don't think I've read anything about that possibility there in verse 1 of chapter 5, so I'll have to look at that. Oh, I did want to mention this too. So chapter 5, verse 1, Garrett mentioned how that the man responds. The poetry is discreet and restrained. It conveys the joy of sexual love without vulgarity. At the same time, the meaning is quite clear. The catalog of luxuries here imply that he has partaken of her pleasures to the full. Interesting. Okay, so Garrett actually takes verse 1 as the chorus also. He says, this brief call from the chorus breaks the tension of the previous verses and opens the way for a second solo similar to chapter 3. The picture of these, of course, he's referring to it because he looks at it as strictly Solomon, the Shulamite girl, and then the daughters of Jerusalem being the chorus. For him, there's no one else attached to the chorus except for the daughters of Jerusalem. So when he says the picture of these girls, that would be the daughters of Jerusalem, intruding on the couple's lovemaking is jarring only if one forgets that this is a song and not some kind of history or drama. By keeping the genre of this text in mind, one can avoid such outrageous interpretations. The chorus calls on both man and woman to let themselves be intoxicated with love. That's possible. I hadn't read that part here in Garrett's thing, but either way you go with it, I think it makes sense both ways. So, thoughts through verse 1 of chapter 5. Okay. Verse 2. Now, this is a mirror passage to chapter 3. Okay, what's being described, again, I mentioned Zer, he takes chapter 3 and chapter 5 literally. Okay, this is literally happening. She's going out, she's looking for her beloved and so forth. And in this text, she's actually beaten by the guards and stripped naked. Okay, trying to relay that into its meaning as to why is that in the song? Why is that not referenced again in the Song of Solomon if that actually happened? It doesn't make sense to read it literally. In fact, most of the Song of Solomon, as we've noted, the majority of it really isn't meant to be taken literally. Okay, all of it is poetic language of describing this love between Solomon and the Shulamite girl, and of course the marriage between the two and the fulfillment, consummation of that marriage. So here in chapter 5, keep the same thought process as we did back in chapter 3. That when she speaks about this, she's speaking about it in a figurative way. She's speaking about something else. Verse 2, I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is covered with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. I have taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I defile them? My beloved put his hand by the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. So here in verse 2, 3, and 4, what we have is not just him randomly knocking on her door saying, hey, let me in. This is very symbolic, and it's really all a reference to the first part of chapter 5. Solomon, when he speaks about the consummation of their marriage. She, though, is going to have much more detail into this event coming from a woman of her time, from her perspective. Okay, so when she says, I sleep, but my heart is awake. Okay, she is a virgin, but she has this desire for Solomon. Again, this is describing this wedding night. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one, for my head is covered with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. It's as if he's been waiting for her and waiting for her and waiting for her, and now is the appropriate time. Okay, we'll stop there with verse 2. We'll pick up here in chapter 5, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. Thank you, everybody, for the thoughts and comments.